Mr. Danielson will be filming us today. So thank you for being here, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. We'll now move on to the item that was pulled by Councilor Neisert. And
Point of order.
I'm sorry.
Did you want that before or after 21?
oh yeah, that's fine. You want to do 21 first, and then we'll do. Okay, thank you, Councilor. No, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Item 21, please.
Item 21 is a conditional use permit appeal, 5631-2016, 235 North Prairie Avenue, Pettigrew subdivision lots 1, 3, and 4, lots 1 through lot 4, block 26, Bennett's second addition to City of Sioux Falls. The request for the conditional use permit was for an electronic message sign in a residential zoning district, denied at the October 5th, 2016 Planning Commission meeting with a vote of 0 yes, 7 no.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Diane Ducoyer with Planning Commission. With Planning. The conditional use permit for the electronic message sign is located within a residential district that the applicant is applying for. The applicant is Augustana Lutheran Church. The property is located at 235 North Prairie Avenue, which is just south of West 7th Avenue. The submitted sign plan indicates a two-sided electronic message sign. The height of it is 1 foot 9 inches, and the width is 6 foot 10 inches, located on the east side of the property on North Prairie Avenue. This sign will replace the church's static sign that exists at approximately the same location. Excuse me. We have had numerous letters and emails, both at the time of the Planning Commission and then recently with the appeal coming up. And I have some of the summaries to that if you'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I can provide that information after the applicant attests to some of the.
Dan, why don't you do it now? It's a summary of probably both some pro and some con.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Oppositions, we received approximately 6 letters regarding the sign. The concerns of the opposition was that that Prairie is too high a foot and vehicle traffic for the neighborhood where the electronic message sign would be located, and any moving message would be distractive to drivers as well as those that would enter the intersection at Prairie and 7th, so on Prairie as well as at the intersection. The church is also located in the Cathedral Historic District, which is mostly residential, and the electronic message sign is out of character with the neighborhood. Also, the church has indicated the EMC, Electronic Message Center, will mostly be static, but it can't be enforced once it's approved. So if they say they would accept a condition to just change that sign once a week, we have no way of enforcing it. So that is really in opposition to it. It would be a difficult thing to be able to enforce. In support of the electronic message sign, this is both by neighbors and church members. We received 6 letters that included about 32 signatures. It increases the visibility of work and service for the church in the community. It improves communication for the church of upcoming events. They're willing to add restrictions to the sign to be sensitive to the neighborhoods. A couple of the things that they offered, again, that it would be static, that they may change the message only once a week, but I think that's still open for discussion. And they wouldn't have any graphics or moving messages. It would strictly be limited to words. So that kind of summarizes both the opposition and support of the sign. I can answer any questions you might have.
Diane, before you do that, why don't I go to the public? Folks, if there's anybody here who wants to chat about this with the council before I turn it over to them, this is the right time to do it. If you wouldn't mind, just come forward, introduce yourself, both pro and con. We'd appreciate that. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Case. I am the council president at Augustana Lutheran Church, 235 North Prairie Avenue. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to you the appeal of our decision from the Planning Commission last month. Thank you also to Diane at the Planning Department for helping us through this process. We decided to appeal the Planning Commission's decision because we felt we did a poor job showing the support for the sign. There were two individuals who spoke against the sign at the Planning Commission meeting, and they seemed to carry the day with regard to the fact that the sign didn't fit the neighborhood. Subsequently, we also heard a neighbor had opposed the sign because they thought the placement would be parallel to the road, similar to our existing sign today, when in fact it would be perpendicular to the street to minimize the effect of the homes across the street. So their objection was with incorrect information. Additionally, after the meeting, we learned that one of the planning commissioners thought that everyone in attendance that night was against the sign, when in fact it was only the two people who had spoken up that were opposed, and there were over a dozen other people in attendance that night that were in favor of the sign. They just didn't get up to say anything. But to that end, I would like to point out that there are all these people over here that are actually in favor of the sign. So I wanted to make sure that they were recognized as such. It is true that Augustana Lutheran is inside the Cathedral Historic District, barely. Prairie Avenue is the western border of that designated area. And that said, our neighborhood, as we consider it, is much larger. We consider our neighbors to be from Minnesota to West Avenues and from West 10th Street all the way to Russell. It's a much larger area than just the Cathedral Historic District, and it encompasses hundreds of additional homes. I think it's also important to remember that we as a congregation are a neighbor too. The congregation voted to approve this sign by a vote of 35-3 at one of our congregation meetings, and we have and always will strive to be a good neighbor. We took care to work with Pride Neon to design the sign with respect to the historic nature of our original building and keep that in mind. A couple of weeks ago, I stood here and showed you a couple of pictures, I think which have been scrolling anyway, or this one is a picture of our original sign. It's over 90 years old and really must be replaced. The metal frame has rusted through to the point that we're unable to really change anything about the sign. So if we zoom in to the next picture, as of next week, this sign is going to be completely out of date because the pastor of Pueblo de Dios is leaving to accept another call in Minnesota. Pueblo de Dios is a Hispanic congregation that Augustana Lutheran partners with. They utilize our building for worship services and many other events throughout the year, and their congregation does great work and ministry with the Hispanic population, not only of our immediate neighborhood, but also of Greater Sioux Falls. Our intent with this message board is simply to be able to more effectively and efficiently communicate with the neighborhood. So essentially that would include 4 distinct separate messages at any given time that would roll, or not, they wouldn't physically roll, they would change throughout the day. Those 4 messages would be an upcoming Augustana event, an upcoming Pueblo de Dios event, our worship schedule, and then we think some kind of neighborhood public service announcement would also be beneficial. According to the current sign code, we could install a non-message center sign, like the manual one. Similar to this, it could be as big as 50 square feet based on our lot and the residential neighborhood. However, if we tried to show all 4 of those messages that I mentioned at any given time, we would probably have to take up all 50 of those square feet in order to show those messages with any reasonability. The technology that the message center will allow us to communicate the other messages in a much safer, much more concise and neighborly way by utilizing only 28 square feet, like the last picture here. I guess you've seen this one already. And I think we can agree that with this sign only being 28 square feet instead of 50, the message center itself, as Diane mentioned, it adds up to less than 12 square feet. And I think we can agree that this message center looks better than the bright white bars of the previous manual sign. Additionally, it's my understanding that from the folks at Pride Neon, that our message center is the same size as that message center at the Midco Aquatic Center, which is in full view of the houses across the street from that and adjacent to the park. For me personally, the most frustrating aspect of this process has been there's a handful of people in the area that Diane had mentioned that have opposed our sign before the city, but they have not been in touch with me or the church. I discussed this sign at one of the neighborhood watch meetings, and we've hosted 2 additional neighborhood meetings looking for input and discussion about the sign. However, only one person expressing opposition attended any of those meetings, and there was no alternative messaging solution offered at the time. We've worked hard to design the sign to fit the building and have placed the sign perpendicular to the street in order to minimize its view from the neighbors across the way.
Kevin,
Yeah.
before you continue, sir.
Yeah.
Are you the only person speaking amongst your group here?
I don't think so. I think there were others that were planning to speak as well.
Okay. Well, normally the decorum, as David talked about, is 5 minutes or less, okay? You're at about 5:30 right now.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And
Talking
so
slowly.
what I'd ask is that try to wrap it up as best you can,
Yep.
or maybe have some other folks help support you in your thoughts.
No, okay. Very much easily, rather than having any negotiation, we've just gotten a no from them. They didn't want a message center. And I know it's impossible to please everyone all the time, but we feel that the message center is the best alternative than a manual message center. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may
And
have.
Kevin, my gut says there's going to be some questions as well, so don't leave us.
No problem.
Very good. Folks, did anybody else want to discuss this item with the council? You're more than welcome to do so. Come on, anybody, folks. Come on. Yeah, good job. Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Steve Bartling. You'll have to bear with me. I had a seizure about 6 months ago, so sometimes I'm not talking as great as I should.
Okay.
But I've been going to this church. Well, my grandkids were there, and I was born there. I was baptized there. All my kids were baptized. I've been there 20-some years. 10 years ago, we decided to change a big ad in the back of the thing. And everybody here says that, you know, we worry about how tall it is and what's new and what's old. We changed this whole thing out of the church, and nobody said a word about that we couldn't do that. And now we can't put this up here. And they're telling us that we've got 6 people that are complaining about this, but there's only one person that lives on that lot. And that street is not that fast as some of the other streets that are out here. I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm upset, but I've been pretty fired about this because it seems like we weren't even allowed to really even talk, and all you guys did was just walk right over us last time we were here. And this time we want to be heard that, you know, we've done a lot for this thing. People that come to this place on a September when we have what?
Food to you.
Yeah, we have food. We paid food people. We do all kinds of stuff for people around the state over here. And it'd be nice to be able to put stuff up that, hey, on Thursday, we're putting this, Tuesday night, on Friday, we're doing this. And all we have to do is worry about why we aren't allowed to do what we're doing around here. This will be no different than what we had up here before. This church has been there for a long, long time. This thing has been here for a long time, too. And all we were last time was just dumbed right out of it because no one else was willing to say. We didn't realize that it was that big of a problem for us to make a change up here. And that's all we've been seeing ever since we were here that day. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Appreciate it. Folks, anybody else want to engage the council? Welcome.
Jim Standen, Sioux Falls, member of Augustana Lutheran. I just want to say right off the bat, and I hope my decorum is all right, but I heard someone tonight say, well, we could enter into a conditional use with the church. I think that was the exact comment, with the church. But then again, we don't know if we can trust them. I felt insulted. Can you imagine if the cathedral would have come before you for a conditional use approval and that statement was made? We are a small, little congregation. In fact, we are 2 congregations, one Spanish and one was founded by Swedes. But believe me, we'll keep our promises. If that is of any consideration of you, I know the people will keep our promises. I have to say, too, that we're totally confused about why we were rejected by the other board. It seems to be either it was safety, and that's ridiculous. How many accidents have there been in Sioux Falls clustered around electronic billboards? Did they bring any proof to you? I'm a debate coach. I was before I retired. They have to basically prove to you that an electronic billboard is a safety problem. And I don't think there was any evidence to prove that there is a safety issue. Secondly, historic nature of the neighborhood. I'm just going to piggyback. We built an addition about 12 years ago. 12 years ago. Huge addition. It didn't, I think it's beautiful, but it didn't conform to the original church. And there was no discussion that somehow or another this violated the historic nature of the neighborhood. And let's be honest, take a trip in that neighborhood and you'll see how historic it is. There is a house next door to our church that should be condemned. Take a trip there. It's terrible. All last winter, a basement window was out, never replaced. I can only imagine how discomforting that must have been to the people who live there, the renters who live there. And I can't imagine the varmints that must live in that basement. And so let's not talk about an historic neighborhood. Something like Tara is going to be compromised if we put up this sign. And lastly, it seems to me too that they had the mistaken impression that most of the people at the zoning committee meeting were opposed to it, so I guess we're opposed to it too. Now, if I'm mistaken, I'd be more than happy to hear the arguments, but I haven't heard any arguments. It's either safety, historic, or everyone there was opposed to it. It wasn't the case.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Welcome.
Greetings. As you know, I'm David Zokaitis, and from what I can gather, the plan is to replace a grody old sign with a nifty new sign. Well, so far so good. And that sounds like a really good idea. And I think there's some concern over how often the sign gets changed. If that's all written down, I don't see how there could possibly be enforcement problems. If you've got a deal and it's in paper and the deal gets screwed up, well, you have recourse to say, down goes the sign. But I'm a little bit confused as to how often the sign is supposed to change. I've heard that once a week is it, and then I also heard a little bit about they've got 3 lines of text that they need to put 4 things on. So it sounds like, well, yeah, once a week, but once an hour. So they need to clear that confusion up. But, I like the idea of replacing grody old signs with nifty new signs that look pretty nice.
Thank you, David. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Frank Elvine. Live at 6311 South Calico Place in Sioux Falls. That house that Jim was talking about was my house. I grew up in that house, right next door to Augustana Lutheran Church. I lived there from 2nd grade through high school. And when my parents joined that church in 1944, our present sign that's up here was already 20 years old. So our sign has not been functional for many years. And as Steve has mentioned, nowadays seems like the goal of the church is to address community needs with free Thanksgiving dinners, bazaar sales, block parties. There was a time when we wanted to move the congregation to a park. We put a note in the bulletin, and they would go to the park for a picnic. They'd go to a farm for hunting. They'd go to the Nordic Hall for lutefisk and Swedish meatballs. Those days are gone. The dynamics have changed dramatically, and now the whole goal is to serve the community. And with that in mind, the idea was to try and get a new sign Going to the sign people, they say they don't make signs with light bulbs and fluorescents anymore. It's all LED lights because of the efficiency, long-lasting, digital control, what have you, it's computer control. Any event, the sign that we're requesting would look exactly like the sign that we're allowed. We're allowed a 50 square foot sign. We're asking for a 26 square foot sign. And it'll look the same as black and white. The only advantage is you don't have to wait out in the snow and clip in the letters, try and find a 9 or a 6 or an I or an L, and try and make sense of the message. But we request to have the signs so we can serve the community better. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Folks, anybody else want to engage the council on this topic? Welcome.
Good evening, Council. My name is Angela Bailey, and I'm a representative of the electronic sign manufacturer Daktronics. So I just wanted to address some of the safety concerns that some of the emails and people here have mentioned. So numerous safety studies have been completed regarding electronic signs, and that's why they're allowed, is that these studies have shown that they're not hazardous. And actually, I wanted to put this on the projector just to show you guys all of the safety studies that have been completed, and so you can see this. But basically, because of all these safety studies that have been completed, you'll see signs all around Sioux Falls along busy streets, intersections. Matter of fact, the state DOT and numerous other DOTs in the country, they even utilize the electronic signs to communicate messages to the traveling public. So I just wanted to point out that if safety was a concern, these signs wouldn't be allowed anywhere, whether it's, in a residential area or along a busy street or intersection, that there's been a lot of research as identified up there, and that's why I really don't think safety should be an issue with this particular sign, just given what is around Sioux Falls and around the state and around the country. So if you have any questions about safety or anything about the sign capabilities, feel free to ask me, so I'm available.
Angela, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Linda Sandin. I'm a member of Augustana Lutheran Church. The church sits in a residential area of Sioux Falls that was once a very vibrant, growing neighborhood, but over the years, things have changed a lot in that part of the city. But one thing has stayed constant, and that is the church that sits at 7th and Prairie and all the wonderful outreach that it does in the community. We have a monthly food giveaway program that is hosted at Augustana Lutheran. We have a growing youth program. I think these things are vital to the stability of what seems to be kind of a lower economic neighborhood that surrounds the church now. So by allowing an electronic message board in front of the church on Prairie Avenue, we feel it will enhance the communication with the neighborhood. The old sign is broken, can't be fixed. It needs to be replaced with something. So please help us forge ahead in the 21st century with a tool that will help Augustana continue to do God's work in the north end of Sioux Falls. Thank you.
Linda, thank you. Folks, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Dixie Heeb. I think I laid out my reasons for not wanting the sign, and I think I'm carrying the flag of the neighborhood this evening. I live directly north of Augustana Lutheran. You can see my front porch, I think, on that sign. I know Kevin, because he used to live near me. I went to the informational meeting. I was torn. I love Augustana Lutheran. I like the work they do. I don't mind that there's cars parked up and down our street. I don't mind street closings for picnics. I don't mind any of that. I hate the thought of an electronic sign in a purely residential neighborhood. There's just no way any of you would want this sign across the street from you. The Aquatic Center is not a good comparison. It's next to the Western Mall. Park Ridge Mall. There's just no good reason that this has to be an electronic sign. It seems like the church has hung their hat on that. And frankly, I personally disagree with planning on whether or not a sign that's a contributing building to a designated historic district. There's standards for signs, there's standards for additions, there's standards for preservation. I think those all have to be jumped through. And I think the first mandate would be to try and repair that sign. And I understand it may not be repairable. I'm not saying it can, but I think that would be the first thing. I don't think an electronic sign is in any way consistent. I think safety was a minor concern, and I think I'm the one that raised that first, because the corner of 7th and Prairie is kind of ugly in terms of how people zoom through there and things that distract them. But that really truly is a minor concern to me. I think the major concern is just the inconsistency of an electronic sign in a purely residential neighborhood, no signs anywhere, and then in a historic district on top of that. And I think there's been some very hostile reactions to people that have come and voiced their concerns. And I think that's the reason I'm the only one from the neighborhood here tonight. And I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but I don't think any of the members that have spoken in favor of this live by this church any longer. So for the reasons I put in my letter, I really do believe that this should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Dixie. Appreciate that. Welcome, sir.
Jordan Bra. I'm a member of Augustana Lutheran and a resident of Sioux Falls, and I full disclosure, I'm not a resident of the neighborhood. But I do have maybe a better comparison for a sign that I thought of this weekend. And Harrisburg Explorer Elementary is in a residential neighborhood, and there is a sign with animation that is actually larger than the one we're proposing. And there are roughly 500 to 600 children that are bused, walk, ride their bikes to school. There's also a park there. And perhaps that's a better safety comparison. And as far as I know, there haven't been any incidents where anyone has been hit or injured. That was the best example that I guess I could think of that isn't arterial. And I just wanted to speak in favor of the sign, and thank you for the opportunity.
Jordan, thank you. Appreciate that. Welcome.
Dan Daly, Sioux Falls. The judicial ordinance of the city of Sioux Falls does not allow for appeals into court. You can't stop these people. You can fine them as long as they don't pay the fine. There's no guilt. You can't take them to court. They can't take you to court. This body has no purpose without changing that judicial ordinance. You'll send out a big goon code enforcer. He will threaten them. It happened to me. It's happened to others. They'll issue a couple citations. Ask for 2. It's double jeopardy. The whole point is mute after the second citation. I don't know why these people are even here. Build it. Build it. It's happening with other digital signs across the city. Unless you change your judicial ordinance, we want our constitutional liberty back. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Welcome.
Scott Erisman, Sioux Falls. I'd have to agree with Jim back here to say that a church wasn't going to, the church says they were going to make the sign static. I think I would believe them. A Christian church that follows the teachings of Jesus Christ, I don't know why they would go back on their promise. Anyway, I also found it, I wanted to clarify something with some of the church members. The council isn't the one that denied this. The planning department is the one that denied this. The council is hearing this for the first time, and they're going to either deny it or prove it. So I don't want people in the audience to be confused that they've denied this. The council has lately had to fix the things the planning department and the planning commission have done because of whatever reasons they've done it. The council is here to fix those things. Just want to clarify that. But I found it a little ironic. Tomorrow night there's a planning commission meeting, and on the agenda is a sign, an electronic sign, much larger than this one, and not historical, just a big electronic sign, that's going to go in a residential neighborhood on 26th Street for, I think, Good News Church. I don't know if I got the name of the church right, which I think is fine, and I think it should be approved. And the planning commission, or the planning department, told the planning commission to approve this. They recommend approval. So I'm really confused why an electronic sign that's much larger than this on a very busy 4-lane road adjacent to a residential neighborhood is just good and dandy and okay with the planning department, but a tiny 28 square foot, which isn't really big, people, I want you to know that. I work in sign business. It's not very big at all. That is static and that will shut off at night is not hurting the historical nature of this neighborhood in any way, shape, or form. That is a ridiculous argument, and I'm all for keeping historical neighborhoods, but I see nothing with this sign that destroys that neighborhood in any way. So I hope you approve it.
Thanks, Scott. Folks, okay, sir, welcome.
Fred Moffett, Sioux Falls. I live at 205 North Colville. I walk by this church just about every evening right after supper. And I very seldom run into anybody on the street or the sidewalk. There's a few people maybe sitting on their front porches or in their yards, but nobody's ever, I don't see hardly any cars come along there. I go to a men's group meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning on every Wednesday, and we're the only ones in the whole neighborhood that are up that time of day. I don't see where the safety issue for cars and kids is a problem. In defense of our old sign, I have changed the letters in the old sign. This is a rhetorical question. When does not the wind blow in South Dakota? Well, they're little tiny letters. They're made of aluminum. And when you open the door and the wind blows, they're at Dixie's house or they're down at the other corner of 8th and Prairie. I mean, it's impossible to change that sign any time of the day or night, usually. So I'm all in favor of this sign. The color of the brick is not going to be white. That might be a deterrent. When you look at it, it's just pretty bright, but it's not. It'll be red brick, just like the church foundation. So that'll really subdue the actual aesthetics of the sign. So I just wanted to say it's just hard to change the old one. I'd like to see a new one because you can just type it in and push a button and you have it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Fred. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Sally Tapkin. And I just want to say very good arguments from everyone tonight, and I certainly appreciate what the church is arguing and debating tonight. This is not a personal agenda, not an attack by any means, but just kind of my own personal thoughts. I just want to add my voice to the neighbors in that neighborhood. I have lived in that neighborhood for 48 years, give or take a couple years, being somewhere else. I've purchased a home not far from there, and I love the neighborhood and the historic value that it all holds. Just very briefly, the place for bright lights and digital signs is not in a residential neighborhood, period. Residential neighborhoods are supposed to be places of rest and relaxation. Our homes are a haven after a long day, but there is nothing relaxing about a bright, lit-up sign blaring its lights and messages into your home at all hours. Where are the rights of these neighbors? Where are the rights of residential neighborhoods? The essential question is, I feel, would any of you want this sign across from your home? If your answer is no, as I feel it should be, then the only way you can vote is in favor of the neighbors and in favor of the neighborhood. I'm quoting, I believe you, Mr. Mayor, on several occasions that we want a city of good neighbors. Augustana Lutheran Church should start by being one. On a more personal note, I've attended many meetings and activities at that church through years, have loved it, have loved the congregation. have been to a couple services, and have thought recently, before any of this came to light, I like this church. I think it's interesting, and I'm certainly of no particular faith, but I found it comfortable. But after all that's kind of happened lately, I'm really questioning, do I want to be a part of something that's being made so large about something so small? I know it's not small to you, but I just think we start setting a precedence if we start allowing, even if this small thing is in residential neighborhoods and historic neighborhoods. Just some thoughts, just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Folks, very good. I appreciate the dialogue. I know the council does too, and also appreciate the diversity of the conversation. So very, very good. I'm now going to turn it over to the council. Councilors, questions, comments? Councilor Neitzer.
Mayor, I do have some questions, but I do need to make a disclosure. On October 6th, I did get a call from Kevin Case, the president of the church council, I believe. This was the day after the conditional use permit was denied, and he called me because the church is in my district by a block, but it's in the district. His main question was whether I thought it was worth appealing the conditional use permit. And what I told him was, speaking as a citizen who's watched this for many years, not as the counselor, I will just tell you, you have two options. You can either do nothing and wait 6 months and try again, or you can take a run at it and you can appeal. I have no idea how it would go. And I also told him that this would be quasi-judicial. I will disclose this even though you haven't even appealed yet, just out of an abundance of caution. And that he should talk to Diane in planning to find out what the procedure would be, and that what he's going to find out is that there's things as far as how they should communicate with us, and they should generally not communicate with us. And I told him I hadn't even watched the meeting and I didn't have an opinion of it. The only thing he shared with me was generally at the meeting, essentially what he had shared, which was that there is concerns about maybe the historic neighborhood, and then you know, just the fact that it's a digital sign, and that. So I just wanted to make that disclosure to get that on the record because it's quasi-judicial. If I could just ask a few questions for Mr. Case first, if that'd be okay.
John?
Yep. Hours of operation, would you have a problem with, I think I heard this maybe at the Planning Commission meeting, would you have a problem with hours of operation, for example, turning it off between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.?
We would not have a problem with that, and I think that I had that in one of my written letters, I think, that I enclosed with the agenda, that was one of the things that I think would be important for the neighborhood and to be a good neighbor and to continue being a good neighbor, to make sure that it does go dark after 10 p.m. I think that's important, whether it's 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Yeah, we would be in favor of doing something like that.
Okay, and something else I had thought about was the dimming, but as you may know, that's in code already.
Right, I think
that
that's
has to happen as part of code, so that's that has to happen.
So it would get dimmer as the sun goes down, so it wouldn't be
yes, the
as
intensity
bright
changes.
as it would be during the daytime. It would.
What about, how about a restriction that the message center shall change its message in intervals no less than 60 seconds? So the message couldn't change more than once every 60 seconds. Do you have a time that you would
I guess
think would work?
I hadn't thought specifically or too specifically about times. I believe in talking with the Daktronics and the Pride Neon folks. I think it's state law is every 6 seconds that like a static billboard would change every 6 seconds. So we talked about 10 or 15 seconds. 50. Just thinking that if you're driving or if you're standing there, 15 or even 30 seconds is an eternity to look at even if we had 3 lines of text, which I don't know how frequently it would be 3 lines, but it would be an eternity to see that sign and to not be distracting. And then I think the code also has things about how it would flip. It wouldn't rotate or scroll or things like that that are written in the code as well.
Yes, no animation. You'd have no problem with no animation.
Right, yeah.
May I ask a question of the Daktronics representative?
Folks, anybody here from Daktronics? Yes, welcome. Angela?
Hi, Angela here.
Angela, thank you.
Yep.
I had it in my notes and I couldn't find it. So technically, are you helping or working on this sign? Or do you have anything to do with this particular sign?
This particular one, I've been assisting the customer here.
Okay. So technically, can it be set on a timer?
Yep, so basically with our software, you can schedule content. That's how it works. You schedule content. So what you do is say from 10 to 6 a.m. or 10 to 7, you'd have no content. And so then it would just appear black. It'd appear like it's off. So it's a very easy thing to do in the software.
Okay, and then as far as tweaking the intervals that the message changes, is that easy to do?
Yep, that's all in the software. You can, the end user can easily set that. It can, I think it can adjust to quite a few different intervals in seconds. So you could set it to whatever you wanted to set it at, whatever the permit required.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to disclose, since it's
Sure.
quasi-judicial, that I did speak to Mr. Frank Alvine today, and just general pitch of the same letters that you've been seeing and the reasons to vote for it. But again, since it's quasi-judicial, needed to disclose. Thank you.
Councilor, appreciate it. Council Vice Chair Kiley.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I have anything I need to disclose other than I drive by this on a pretty regular basis on my way to work each day. And I would also point out that Prairie Avenue, while it's being classified here tonight as a residential area, Prairie Avenue is the only through street that I'm aware of between Minnesota Avenue and West Avenue. So it is fairly heavily traveled. So I don't know if I would necessarily classify it as a residential street, but maybe more as a collector street. It's true that the church is in a historic district, but the sign, since it is not attached to the building, it's not regulated governed by the same regulations of historic buildings. So I think we're kind of comparing apples to oranges in that regard a little bit. The safety problem was addressed, and I think Jim did an excellent job of addressing that. I mean, where is the proof? And I'm in traffic safety, so we deal with these issues quite frequently, but I do not have the documented evidence that illustrates that signs that are electronic versus static signs are any more of a problem in terms of traffic accidents. It's interesting, a manual sign could be up to 50 square feet, where we're looking at just under 12 square feet, and with the proposed electronic sign. And what's related to that and interesting is on the existing old sign, there's a huge spotlight. And I would like to know, is that functional? Is that used?
I don't.
Thanks, Kevin.
No, I don't think that sign, no, that light is not currently functional. But it would otherwise be bright, lighting up the side of the building where those three crosses
Nothing
are.
prohibiting that light from being used if it were functional
No, I think
and
it's
shining on the front of the building.
Right, yeah, it's more of an electrical maintenance issue on our part.
Thank you. So, I question the amount of light emitted or the lumens of a manual sign up to 50 square feet versus one that's an electronic sign that's 12 square feet or smaller, whether the amount of light emitted would be any greater on the part of the electronic sign. And in terms of, this is a conditional use. So we can, as Councilor Neitzer has suggested, we can place additional conditions on this. And it would be enforced the same way other ordinances are enforced throughout the city. So, I think that if there were concerns, that it would be simple, that the neighbors or the individuals with the concerns can contact the city, as is generally the case, and express their concern, and then the city would deal with it as is appropriate. The 60 seconds, I know that's been thrown out, versus the 6 or 8 seconds. I was thinking with billboards it was 8 seconds, but we're pretty close with the 6 or 8 seconds either way. 60 seconds is quite a long period of time. I don't walk very quickly, and I could probably walk past it before the sign would ever change. But regardless, I think that could be worked out yet here this evening. But this has been kind of a head scratcher for me, and I cannot think of a reason why I would oppose this particular electronic sign. I'll leave it up to the rest of my colleagues at this point. Thank you.
You're welcome. Counselor Staley.
I was just going to disclose that this morning, Diane and I had a conversation about Dixie's letter that we got, email that we got last night. And I was just going to, and you, Counselor Kiley just touched on this, but I was going to ask Diane if she would just reiterate for the listening audience here why the Board of Preservation would not enter into this signage situation.
I reviewed that question with our historic preservation specialist in Pierre, Liz Almley, and questioned whether or not, prior to it even coming to Planning Commission, if the Board of Preservation had to review it, since the church is within the Cathedral Historic District. She said because it's not on the building and it's not obstructing the building as a freestanding sign, the board did not have to review it. So it was her opinion that we did not need to, so we didn't proceed with action on it at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Mr. Mayor.
Counselor Starr.
Great. Diane, one more question. Maybe a brief statement first, but I always take the work of the Planning Commission and staff very much to heart. I appreciate the work they do, and it's always very difficult to go past what, to disagree with staff and to disagree with the Planning Commission. So more the, how seriously I take this, but after listening to Councilor Kiley, are we missing something on top of that, with those concerns addressed, that to move forward or to overrule what the Planning Commission did?
Staff did not have a recommendation at the time of the report. It was left up to the Planning Commission and the neighbors and those in attendance to make that decision based on the information that was provided at the meeting. It was denied 7-0, from the Planning Commission, and that was mostly, I think, based on the input that they received for those that opposed the sign in the neighborhood. There were some safety concerns, whether they were perceived or real, and I think also the aesthetics of it within a historic neighborhood.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would anybody want to make a motion? Counselor Erickson?
There's been great discussion, and for the interest of moving it along, I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Counselor.
Second.
Thank you, Council Vice Chair. There's been a motion to approve and has been seconded. Any discussion? Council Chair Rolfing.
Diane, was mentioned here today by one of the people who spoke about our ordinance, our current ordinance. Can you cite that a bit about when and why and why not a sign like this could or could not be approved? There's been some specifics there.
The church is located within a residential district, so anytime there's a proposal for an electronic message center within a residential district, it does have to be reviewed by Planning Commission.
It just has to be reviewed. It doesn't say that it's not supposed to be there. It just says it has to be reviewed.
It just says it has to be reviewed for a conditional use permit because it's in a residential. We have a lot of churches that are coming forward, even one tomorrow night that was mentioned earlier with Good News Church. A lot of times they are located on arterials. Prairie is a collector street. It's a little bit different than some of the other locations where we have churches with signs similar to this one.
Okay. Thank you. That answers that question.
Very good. Counselor Erickson.
Do a point of order to our attorney, please. There was a possible conditions that we just saw this evening. My question to you is, if this is made a motion and indeed passes, do we need to send that back to Planning Commission because it's significant changes to that particular item like we've done in the past?
No, Counselor. Under Section 160.616, the City Council can require additional conditions at their discretion, and you do that at this public hearing. So we
don't have to send it back?
You
Because
do
we've done
not.
that
No,
before.
you are specifically empowered by your own ordinance that you can add whatever conditions at your discretion that you believe are appropriate at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Neisert.
Question for you, Diane. If this was just passed with no amendments, what part of this is locked in? Is it just can any part of the sign change as long as they stay within a certain square footage? I mean,
As long as they stay within the square footage as proposed, and if it's approved by you, it can be located in a residential district. Any other conditions are difficult to enforce. We don't have staff to go out and look at these for every property where we might have conditions placed on it that are unique.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a motion to amend and see how it goes. I'm going to make a motion to amend by adding the following conditions. Number 1, the sign shall be a monument-style sign. Number 2, the electronic message center shall be turned off between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. 7 days per week. Number 3, the electronic message center shall not be more than 12 square feet per side of the sign face. Number 4, the electronic message center shall be directed perpendicular to Prairie Avenue. Number 5, the electronic message center shall not make use of animation. Number 6, the electronic message center shall change its message in intervals no less than 10 seconds. And number 7, the sign shall be located on the east side of the church abutting North Prairie Avenue.
Second, Erpenbach.
It's been a motion made by Councilor Neisert, and it was seconded by Councilor Erpenbach. Any discussion, Councilor Neisert?
I just want to try to lock in essentially what we see here, make sure that things don't change. I think 10 seconds is an eternity that makes it more or less, quote unquote, static. As you're driving by, you're probably only going to see one message. The sensitivity to the neighborhood as far as turning it off at night and not having, lights coming in people's window, facing it so it's perpendicular to the road, so the light is not directed towards anybody's house. And I think that's just a good way to let them have what they'd like to have, but be sensitive to the neighborhood.
Good job. Thank you. Councilor Erpenbach, any comments? Very good. Councilor Vice Chair Kiley.
Just a follow-up on the 10 seconds, and I can appreciate that change. But my question is, and Diane, can you clarify with our existing electronic billboards, is it 8 seconds?
I believe they are 6 seconds.
They are
I'm
6
not
seconds.
100%, but I do believe it's 6 seconds.
I'm almost wondering if we shouldn't just keep it uniform, billboards versus electronic signs, 6 seconds. So I would just make a proposal that we would amend the amendment.
If somebody tells me procedurally how to do it, I'm happy to make that tweak.
David, can Councilor Neisert just make a friendly amendment and have Councilor Erpenbach do the second? Councilor Neisert, would you be willing to make a friendly amendment to change the 10 seconds to no less than 6 seconds?
I would.
Councilor Erpenbach, would you be willing to second that?
I would not.
You would not.
Second, Erickson.
Is that okay? Thank you. I'm learning too, Councilor Erickson. Thank you. Good job. There has been a friendly amendment made by Councilor Neisert, seconded by Councilor Erickson. And really the only change was instead of it being no less than 10 seconds, it's no less now than 6 seconds. So there has been an amendment made and a motion to amend the motion that's been already made. If there's no further discussion, roll call vote please on the amendment. And basically what those are conditions that have been placed on the main motion. Okay? Roll call vote please.
So we're voting on all these amendments, including the 6 seconds, or we're just voting on the 6 seconds?
No, you're voting on all of them.
Okay. Council members Erickson?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Kiley?
Yes.
Neitzel?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Selberg?
Yes.
Starr?
Yes.
Staley?
Yes.
Dennis Bass, 8-0. We now have an amended main motion. If there's no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Council members Erickson?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Kiley?
Yes.
Neitzel?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Selberg?
Yes.
Starr?
Yes.
Staley?
Yes.
Dennis Bass, 8-0.
Y'all come back now. Cheers.
Security, escort this gentleman out, please.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.